Welcome, everybody. I am Frank Scheer. I'm a professor of medicine and the director of the medical chronobiology program at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak here today about sleep, circadian rhythms, and their effects on health. Throughout the US, there is an epidemic of obesity and diabetes. And if we look at the map in 1995-ish, and we compare it to what happened in the 20 years thereafter, we see a massive change with about a doubling in the prevalence of obesity and diabetes around the country. And so we can also see that there are certain regions where the risks are higher. Now, the question that has been occupying many investigators and clinicians is why is there such an increase in the risk over just 2 decades, and what lifestyle factors may have to do with this. So the two lifestyle factors that have received most of the attention is diet and exercise, and rightfully. But the other question is are those really capturing all the modern lifestyle changes that we have witnessed? Might it be time for an updated view? And indeed, if we think about modern lifestyle factors, there are many other factors to consider. The increased prevalence of shift work, late eating, artificial light at night. Think about your electronic device use, your phone, your computers, your TV. Sleep disturbances are on the rise, including especially obstructive sleep apnea. We are traveling the globe more, so there's more jet lag, and also social jet lag, which is the change in timing between weekdays and weekend days, where we typically are sleeping and eating later over the weekends. Now, all of these factors have in common that they induce disruptions of sleep and circadian organization. So let's start with sleep, which has been recognized by Bill Murray as a superpower. He says he loves sleep because it's like a time machine to breakfast. But also it's been recognized the importance of sleep by serious scientists. Sleep is occupying about a third of our whole life. And so Alan Ragshapen, one of the grandfathers of sleep, recognized this and said that if sleep does not subserve a absolutely vital function, then it would be the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made. And so it's very clear that sleep must subserve as absolute essential function. It's highly conserved throughout evolution, with all species that have been investigated sleeping at some stage during the day-night cycle. And so if we look at sleep in the US, we see that there's quite a high prevalence of short sleep in the US, and especially again in the same region that I had encircled before. And indeed, in epidemiological work, it's been shown that short sleep and disrupted sleep associates with diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease. But it's also shown that if you experimentally change sleep, that this has as consequence changes in physiology that can help explain this increased risk in diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. So it's not just association, it's also causation. And by the same token, these health consequences feed back to sleep itself as well, and can disrupt sleep, such as when obstructive sleep apnea occurs, where high body mass index is the primary risk factor. And then, of course, this by itself then circles back to disrupt sleep, closing the cycle. Now, all of the audience will be very much aware that if you don't have a good night's sleep, that your cognitive performance is impacted, as well as your mood. But what you might not be as aware of is all the changes it has on your physiology. So your blood sugar control is worse. You may have more hunger and appetite. You may engage in less physical activity because you're more fatigued. If you are engaged in a diet, you're actually less successful at losing fat mass. Your blood pressure might go up, and it's been shown that the effectiveness of vaccination is decreased. So sleep is not just for the brain, but also for the body. And the National Sleep Foundation summarized it as that sleep is as important as diet and exercise, only easier. Now, it's not easier for everybody. Of course, if you have a sleep disorder, sleep might be quite hard to obtain, and obstructive sleep apnea is one of the examples there. Now, what about the circadian system? Since the beginning, life on Earth has been exposed to the cyclical nature of the environment. Changes in light, temperature, predation all cycle with a rhythm of about 24 hours. And so life is adapted to this, as is exemplified here by this heliotrope plant that opens its leaves during the day and closes them during the night. Now, about 300 years ago, there was this French astrophysicist, Jean-Jacques Turtu-de-Meyran, who asked the question, is this leaf movement just due to the sunlight during the day and darkness during the night, or would the leaf movement continue in continuous darkness? So what he did then, he stopped the rotation of the Earth, at least from the point of view of the plant, and found that the plant continued to show a rhythm in its leaf movement with a rhythm of about 24 hours. So this was the first documented evidence for the existence of circadian rhythms. So rhythms of about 24 hours driven by the organism itself. Now, so there is evidence for an internal clock, but how is this organized and where is it located? In the brain, in the early 70s, people had recognized that if there's one brain structure that doesn't function the animals become arrhythmic. So they no longer have 24-hour rhythms in their behavior. And this one brain structure is the suprachiasmatic nucleus that lies on top of the optic chiasm, so where the optic nerves cross. So it showed that this structure is essential, but they also show that it's sufficient. So if you put it in a petri dish, and this is a time-lapse image video, so you can see the cycling of about 24 hours continues even in the dish. And so for the next 20 years, the model was that we have one clock only in our body. But then in the early 90s, it was recognized that we have the same molecular machinery residing in almost every organ and tissue throughout the body. So we have this molecular clock in the heart, in muscle tissue, skin, fat tissue, all of them contain a clock. And it's driven by a transcription translation feedback loop for which the discoverers were awarded the Nobel Prize in 2017. And so really what we have is a multi-oscillator system. And importantly, the different oscillators, the different clocks in our body, listen to different time signals. So our central clock in the brain is responsive to light, but other clocks throughout our body, such as the liver, for example, might be sensitive to food timing. And indeed, if you have mistimed food, your central clock might be in Boston, but your liver clock might be in Tokyo. So the circadian system drives not just sleep, as many people will know, but it drives virtually all aspects of our physiology and our behavior. And this understanding has also led to the interest into the importance on disease states and the prevention, the diagnosis, and treatment of disease, as well as inter-individual differences based on, for example, genetics. But are these variations across the day and night actually truly circadian, or are they just driven by the environment? And so this is work we've been engaged in over the decades, for example, showing important role of the circadian system in the patterns of heart disease as well as asthma symptoms. But also the disruption of circadian organization itself has been shown to lead to adverse health consequences. And this evidence comes from genetic models, anatomy, behavioral changes, and shift work models. More recently, this is work from Joe Takahashi's lab, published last year in Science, showing that the common model of calorie restriction that extends life actually by itself has only a small effect, but that the addition of the timing of food intake is actually much more important in extending life. And this general work that had been done in animal experimental studies had motivated Marta Garolet and myself to study these aspects in humans, where we found that the timing of food intake in humans also relates to the success of weight loss, as is shown here, for example. But we have then subsequently also shown that this is true for bariatric surgery, weight loss success in the subsequent studies. And also we've shown mechanisms that may help explain why late eating leads to an increased risk for obesity and increased body mass index, such as late eating causing an increase in hunger, while at the same time it decreases the number of calories burned and molecular changes in fat tissue. Also for glucose control, the timing of food intake is critical. When you eat when melatonin levels are high, which typically happens during the nighttime hours, your glucose control is relatively impaired to when you eat during the daytime. And this is true not just when you eat during the night, also after you take a melatonin pill. And this is especially important if you're a carrier of one of the risk factors for diabetes, that is a melatonin receptor gene, and this would impact about half of the audience during this lecture. And then we have more recent data showing that not only that, but we can also leverage and utilize this knowledge to improve the outcome, the cardiometabolic outcomes in simulated night work. So the take-home message is that we shouldn't just consider physical activity and what we eat, but also the quality and quantity of our sleep, the alignment of our behaviors with our internal body clock, and also especially the timing of when you eat. And I think it's time also for the medical community to really consider circadian time that has so far mostly been overlooked in clinical medicine. And so the pillars of health might be time for an update to add, in addition to nutrition and exercises, healthy behaviors, to also add sleep. And finally, also to consider not just the amount of what we eat, exercise, and sleep, but also the timing of these behaviors. And so with that, I would like to thank my colleagues, funding agencies, and you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the Osher Collaborative Longevity and Healthy Aging Symposium. I am Dr. Anna Balabanova Shannahan. I am the Associate Director of Education at the Osher Center for Integrative Health at Northwestern University, and I'm also an Assistant Professor in the Department of Family Medicine at Northwestern. Well, maybe I should start over because the slide didn't go so well. I was like, the slide's not clicking. Okay. All right. We'll get it out of the way now. Okay. Yeah. We'll just do it one more time. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the Osher Collaborative Longevity and Healthy Aging Symposium. I am Dr. Anna Balabanova Shannahan. I'm the Associate Director of Education at the Osher Center for Integrative Health at Northwestern, and an assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine at Northwestern. Before I begin today's presentation, if you're able, I'd like to ask you to please stand while you're viewing the presentation. Even better, if you're able to walk in place and view it at the same time, and we'll be going over why during the presentation. So I have 10 minutes to teach you the best ways to exercise for longevity. We can do this. Let's start with why exercise? Why bother? Why is it important for longevity? Not only does it reverse physical decline, but it can slow or reverse cognitive decline as well. We won't get too much into mechanics today, but exercise improves the health of your heart and circulation. It improves mitochondrial function. It improves blood sugar metabolism, and more. In fact, We know it's so effective for these purposes that, as Dr. Peter Attia says in his book Outlive, that many of you may have read, if you adapt only one new set of habits for longevity, it must be in the realm of exercise. So today, in our limited time together, I'd like to give you a few actionable ways you can assess where you're at in terms of fitness for longevity and how to improve that. These will cover both aerobic and strength factors, and both numerical or data-based measurements and qualitative measurements, something for everyone. For those who like numbers, the first value you can pay attention to is VO2 max. Put simply, VO2 max is a measure of fitness of your heart and lung systems. It measures how much oxygen your body can use while you're exercising as hard as you can. The more oxygen a person can use during high-level exercise, the more energy a person can produce. And the way VO2 max is measured is varied. It can be done using an actual cardiorespiratory test on a treadmill or a bicycle, a wearable device, and there's even some online calculators you can use. How do you improve it? By training at or near your VO2 max, for example, with interval training. The good news is any amount of improvement in VO2 max will provide an increase in longevity. Don't be discouraged if you're in the bottom 25%. Just by moving to the 25 to 50th percentile, you cut your risk of death in half. More good news, there's no upper limit of benefit. And it can always be improved by training, no matter how old you are. Next is step counts, something else numerical for those who love tracking data. And we know there are a variety of wearable devices that can measure this, and it's easy to improve by walking every day. And a lot of you may have heard the 10,000 steps per day goal. This is commonly believed by the public to be necessary for health, but this number actually has pretty limited scientific basis. So how much do you actually need? Turns out, according to a very large recent study, you only need 4,000 steps a day to decrease all-cause mortality. Even more exciting, you only need 2,300 steps per day to decrease cardiovascular mortality. If you manage to do even more, then you get even more benefits. So the good news is, first of all, hopefully many of you are taking steps right now as you're watching. And for each additional 500 steps you take, you decrease risk of cardiovascular death by 7%. For each 1,000 steps, you decrease all-cause mortality by 15%. Getting these longevity benefits can be as simple as setting a calendar or alarm reminder and going for a 5 to 10 minute walk. Do it repeatedly, and soon you'll easily be hitting these numbers. Moving on to muscle strength. Don't get this mixed up with just muscle mass or how big your muscles are. It's about how much those muscles can do, which correlates with longevity and quality of life. One way to measure this is with grip strength, which is how hard you can squeeze something with one hand. A surprising amount of studies have linked this to longevity. For exact numbers and comparisons and monitoring progress, you can purchase a grip strength measurement device called a dynamometer. Ways to improve grip strength include focusing on all movements of a resistance exercise, both concentric and eccentric, so both the lifting and the placing back. We can't just drop a weight. Also, farmer carry exercises and hanging exercises. One exciting piece of information is that grip strength can actually be a better predictor of early death than even blood pressure. Lastly, one more piece of exercise homework for longevity is the sitting rising test. There are several ways to do this, but one of the best studied for longevity is that researchers asked participants in a study to, without worrying about the speed of movement, try to sit and then rise from the floor using the minimum support that you believe is needed. So starting from standing, they got 5 points for sitting down unassisted, and 5 points for standing back up, for a possible total score of 10. If someone used a knee or an arm for support, they lost a point. For example, if you use a hand on the floor on the way down, that's -1. If you do the hand again on the way up, that's another -1. So that would be a total of 8 out of 10. Each additional point on the score was associated with a 21% reduction in mortality risk. If you want to improve this, incorporate exercises that focus on your balance, strength, and mobility. Simple moves like squats and lunges can be beneficial. If squatting unassisted is a challenge, build strength by squatting to a chair and then standing back up. In summary, while people often spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on various longevity tests, it's tests of strength and movement, like grip strength and the sitting rising test, which continue to be strong indicators of lifespan and health span. Today, we learned about 4 ways to measure and improve longevity through exercise: VO2 max, step counts, muscle strength measured by grip strength, and the sitting rising test. And with all of these, the good news, especially if you're starting from no exercise, is every little bit counts. Thank you all so much for being here.
Hello, my name is Michelle Foote Pearce. I'm the Director of Mindfulness Programs and Outreach at the Osher Center for Integrative Health at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. And today I'm talking about meditation and the youthful mind. When we talk about meditation in the mind, we're going to talk about some ways that we can enable a more healthy mind. And I wanted to start out by talking about what we're not talking about, paradoxically, which is our usual state of consciousness that we find in the majority of people in the Western cultures. And it's all based on this idea of we get better and better at what we're already doing. Playing the piano, riding a bike, all of these things we practice so that we get better and better at it. What we often find is people are not paying attention to what's in their minds. And so they're practicing this automatic default and chronic stress states of worry, wandering thinking, ruminating thinking, judging themselves, and maybe numbing, watching TV, drinking, so that they don't have to feel the chronic stress from this states of habitual thoughts and reactive patterns. Our mind on meditation is we see a reduction in stress. We literally can see the lengthening of the telomeres, those pieces of our DNA that shorten over time as we have to create more cells because we're in a chronic stress state. So we see actual lengthening of that and actual changes in the brain. The functional MRIs are showing us that the neural networks are changing as we're meditating because we're paying attention to different things. And this is leading to greater awareness and acceptance. Also, greater access, as we're not so emotionally reactive in midbrain, greater access to the prefrontal cortex, which is our higher regions of brain that enable us to have this rational reasoning, reasonable thought rather than emotional thought. And that actually enables us to what we call down-regulate emotional reactivity. We lessen the internal noise, and it nurtures this greater equanimity, wisdom, clarity, and also, importantly, different ways of knowing beyond our rational problem-solving mind, these deeper, wiser layers of our mind that we can access with meditation. So what is meditation, rather? Meditation is actually a broad category of practices that enable or require the focusing of our mind on particular objects, thoughts, or activities. And we do this to train our attention and our awareness. So we're training our minds to focus on what we want them rather than letting the brain go to the automatic default network, which tends to be the stress states. And when we train our attention and our awareness to focus in the present moment, we can achieve a mentally clear and emotionally calm and stable state. And meditation, I want to point out, is practiced across numerous religious traditions as well as in the secular setting. So it's a very broad category, and there are a lot of options on how we can bring meditation into our life. One way is to have a formal meditation practice. We can do this by mindful movement. We can also do this by sitting and focusing on one thing, such as the breath or watching the clouds, or maybe taking a mindful walk. What we're doing when we require our attention to be focused in the present moment is we're actually doing the heavy weightlifting for our brain. We watch when our thoughts tend to wander into this automatic default network, into worry and stress, into thinking about the future, what's going to happen, or rehashing the past. And we gently bring it back to the present moment without judgment, with curiosity, kindness. And this over time, and maybe even not over time, maybe you might have an experience immediately that leads to greater self-awareness. And this more awareness of our typical emotional patterns and reactivity, then we can become more emotionally skillful as we learn that. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Sitting in a chair, getting settled in, feeling your feet, and then simply sitting and breathing. When mind wanders into worry or whatever automatic default network thoughts, then we just gently bring it back to sitting in the present moment and focusing here and now. If we're not focusing here and now, then we're in survival mode oftentimes, because we're filling our brain, our mind with problems, with worry, and that can move us into survival brain. Our whole body goes into survival mode. Oh, life is just too challenging, too difficult. And so it activates survival mode. When we're in survival mode, the things that are enabled, that healing, that peacefulness, even the learning, the higher learning, we don't have as much access to that because the body wants to survive. It's a primary instinctual focus. So what we're doing is we're enabling, by getting out of that auto default mode network of worry and problems, which, by the way, our brain has a tendency to do. A neuroscientist named Rick Hansen says, our brains are Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. So we need to do a little bit more work. We need to, what meditation allows us to invite this inner silence, to let things settle. And that induces a state of equanimity. We know that it leads to improved attention and increased relaxation. So this is a statement from a meta-analysis about mindfulness meditation. Also included were moving meditations like yoga, tai chi, and vipassana, which is insight meditation. And these authors stated in summary that these ways of meditating can be considered emotional and attentional regulatory activities, inducing a state of greater inner silence, and this increases our self-awareness. And they deduce this was a powerful tool, this inner silence we can create to counteract negative events of our stressful environments that we live in. So it's basically the antidote to this chronic stress states. In conclusion, I will leave you with a quote from Jon Kabat-Zinn: "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." By taking a little bit of control of our attention and our awareness and nurturing this less default reactive pattern and this more, what are we filling our minds with? We're enabling ourselves to be more skillful at meeting life and difficulty on a day-to-day basis. That reduces our stress and enhances our well-being. Thank you for your kind attention.